So good morning, good afternoon. I'm Tamara Ecker, Managing Director of British American Business. For those of you not familiar with BAB, we are the leading trade association supporting businesses with operations in the US and the UK markets. It's a pleasure to welcome you today to our second event in our series on the power of purpose, which is in partnership with the fantastic agency Brandpie. We are very lucky to be joined today by three sustainability experts who will discuss the role of purpose in business and how purpose helps shape their organization's approach to sustainability and corporate responsibility. To lead us through the discussion, I am thrilled to introduce you to our moderator, MaryLee Sachs, who is co-founder and US CEO of Brandpie. MaryLee, I'm going to make you blush for a moment, has over 30 years of experience in international marketing and communications. She knows from firsthand experience how purpose drives performance and business transformation. MaryLee has worked on both sides of the Atlantic in both the B2C and the B2B space for brands like American Express and Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, PepsiCo, and many others. So with that, MaryLee, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off.
Thank you very much, Tamara, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Just a few house rules before we get started. We plan on talking, sort of doing Q&A for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to open up the floor to your questions. So at the moment, you are in listen-only mode as your mics are muted, but we encourage you to send questions in, and we'll do our very best to answer what we get. There is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you run your mouse over it, you'll find it. That's the best place to lodge your questions. And as I said, we'll get to them as soon as we can. The session is being recorded so that if you want a recording after the fact, you can ask British American Business for that, and they can make that available to you. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce our illustrious panel of sustainability experts. First, starting with Ashley Allen. Ashley is Chief Sustainability Officer of Oatly, where she is spearheading the company's movement towards a more climate-smart, nature-conscious food system. At Oatly and beyond, Ashley is deeply committed to helping transform the food industry, enabling people to change the way we eat and the way we grow food for a better future for people and the planet. Prior to Oatly, Ashley served as Climate and Land Senior Manager at Mars Incorporated, where she led the climate change and land sustainability initiatives, guiding the company on its science-based target to cut carbon emissions across the value chain, and developed a strategy to stop deforestation in key commodities such as cocoa and palm oil. Ashley began her career in public sector at the US State Department and USAID, leading climate partnerships with countries around the world and helping to negotiate the International Paris Agreement on climate change. She also served on the White House Environmental Council, helping launch President Obama's US Climate Action Plan. Ashley lives outside Washington, D.C. with her nature-loving family. So welcome, Ashley. Balaji Ganapathy is our second panelist I'll introduce. He serves as the Chief Social Responsibility Officer for Tata Consultancy Services, a global top 3 information technology leader. His mission is to harness the power of purpose, people, and technology to advance access, equity, and inclusion across society. He's stewarding TCS's global efforts to empower people and communities with a mission to connect people with opportunities in the digital economy by creating equitable, inclusive pathways for women, youth, and marginalized groups. Balaji brings over 2 decades of business leadership, social innovation, talent transformation, and technology evangelization across geographies and scale of business. As a purpose leader, he's passionately led and supported cross-sector initiatives that have impacted millions of women, minorities, and underserved students in STEM in particular. Balaji has received several awards for championing corporate responsibility programs. He's also involved in the US Chamber of Commerce's Education, Employment, and Training Committee, and I know that he's very active with British American Business too. Finally, last but by no means least, Andy Farrow, who is Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at Mars Incorporated. Andy leads Mars communications, government relations, stakeholder engagement, and corporate brand. He also stewards Mars' ambitious sustainability objectives and the programs in place to make the company's operation sustainable in a generation, their phrase. Prior to his current role, Andy was SVP of Corporate Affairs, Sustainability and Strategy for Wrigley, which is a segment of Mars, where his responsibilities encompassed all aspects of corporate affairs, leadership of global sustainability, and leadership of the development and deployment of Wrigley's business strategy. A native Londoner, Andy began his career in UK politics. He then spent 13 years with the international communications consultancy Hill & Knowlton, where he worked with a wide range of companies, governments, and NGOs as head of the corporate practice for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I can lay claim to working with him as a colleague there. Andy has been living in the US for a decade and says he's finally begun to understand and enjoy baseball. So with that, I'm going to kick off our first question, which I'm actually going to ask Andy to start with, but I want everybody to chime in. Brandpie's second annual survey of CEOs on the subject of purpose highlights the importance of long-term versus short-term value creation, revealing that about 76% of CEOs surveyed believe corporations need to shift focus from short-term profit delivery to the longer-term value creation. Less than 5% have made that shift. And the reasons they give primarily is uncertainty about the future. Do you believe that the advent of the pandemic might change this for the good, or do you think that less bold leaders might entrench even more so?
Thanks, MaryLee. I mean, I think it's a very good question, and I think it raises a question about long and short term, and it also raises a question, I think, implicit in there about what do we mean when we say value creation? Do we define it just as shareholder return, or do we define it more broadly, or does what your shareholders think about matter? It be more than just financial performance. If I talk specifically on Mars, I think we've made our choices on each of them, both of those questions. We have some long-term shareholder objectives called the Mars Compass. You'll find them on our website. They look at financial performance, which we measure over a 3 and 10 year period. They look at, are you well positioned for future growth? They look at what is the impact we're having on the world, positive societal impact. And they look at, are we a trusted partner in society? And essentially all of our leaders are measured against those. We as a business are required to report. The board and the management team are required to report to the owners against them, and we're incentivized against them. So we're taking a long-term approach to value creation and a broad approach to what we mean by value. And I think it goes without saying is you cannot, without financial performance, you cannot do anything else. But if all you're doing is performing financially, then you're not much of a business. Things are more broad than that. I think if you look more broadly in what the impact of COVID is, I mean, we've seen huge societal challenges posed by COVID, and I would say, secondly, the gradual or the sudden awakening to the reality of racial injustice. And I think this has created a real action imperative amongst the business community. COVID has shown us that communications matters more than ever, but communications can't simply be words. And we certainly know from a purpose perspective, all the purpose statements that were written pre-pandemic are really being put to a test. I think there is increasing recognition that companies are far more than the vehicle for just making money. We are actors in society. We have a role to play, and it's up to us to choose whether that's positive or negative. And we see this on a host of issues, including diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think expectations of employees, of consumers, of customers, of shareholders, of investors have changed. And how they view value is changed. And I would see it very much similar to what happened with climate, over the past 20 years. Which moved from a fringe concern actually to a really mainstream concern in politics and a mainstream concern in business. So I think the best businesses are the ones that are using purpose as a North Star for decision making, and they're approaching creating long-term value much more broadly and really embedding it into business challenges. So I think we're on a trend, and I don't think that's going to change.
Cool. Balaji, do you have any?
Yeah, sure. I think I agree with Andy's view. See, if you look at where businesses are today, in the 1950s, the average lifespan of a Fortune 500 company was 60 years. And today, the average lifespan of a Fortune 500 company is only 20 years. So it is imperative for the board and the executives and leaders and people in organizations to understand that a balanced focus on both short-term and long-term is important for you to sustain and grow, right? If you're not there 20 years down the line, then whom are you going to serve, right? And in asking those questions, I think COVID has provided a perfect opportunity. The adversity has come with opportunity to look at resetting a business's priorities and allow for a broader definition of value creation and purpose. So a few points to share there. See, at TCS, we belong to the Tata Group of companies founded in 1868. So we are a 152-year-old company enterprise, and arguably one of the oldest purpose-driven organizations in the world. So what has been the secret of success and sustenance over this period of time? Embedding purpose into every business that the group has started and grown, right? So it is not about value creation for one entity. In fact, our founder said that the very purpose of the existence of a business is to serve the community. And so that principles, that value, how it is entrenched within the company is what makes a huge difference. I believe that today, purpose is the new tech, right? In the last 10 years, every company wanted to be a technology company, to use digital technologies to transform the consumer experience or their supply chain or their own enterprise. Today, every company wants to be a purpose-driven company. And in order to make the transition from good intentions to good actions, you really need to walk the talk in terms of what you're doing, whom you're doing it for, and how you're doing it. And I do believe even within COVID, TCS did a survey in the last couple of months after COVID, and the results are not surprising to me. Majority of the leaders, executives of companies, we had about 300 executives from around the world respond to that. Most were taken by surprise by COVID because this is not expected, but are doubling down on their investments in creating more value for all stakeholders. Because I think that the economic opportunity that is available for businesses as a result of COVID is a more inclusive one. So you don't have to leave any stakeholder behind. You can reset and really look at that long-term value creation using this as the pivot.
Great. Ashley, what's your view on this, the idea of short-term versus long-term, and will the pandemic change people's way of thinking about this?
Yeah, thanks, MaryLee, and thanks so much to Brandpie and to British American Business for hosting this conversation. Oatly's got a bit of a different angle on this. So we're not making any kind of shift because purpose has been the driver of Oatly's business model since we started. And we're newer to the game than a lot of companies. And so our role is to really as a proof point. Oatly's model is showing to be the successful model and the way to operate a business. And really at the center of all of that is prioritizing people and the planet over profit. So that's something that we've been very vocal about and has been part of our message and part of our branding, particularly in the last several years. I think then it really becomes that a false choice in a way. There is no choice between short-term profit and long-term. Look, if you are going to be a successful company, and especially building on Balaji's statistics that he just shared, you have to be thinking about the long-term. There is too much at stake, and there are too many variables externally that are just changing on a daily basis. I mean, just think about how crazy 2020 has been, how many disruptions we've had externally. Everything from COVID, which you've mentioned, to a reckoning around equality, which Andy mentioned, to the visible signs on almost a weekly basis that climate change is happening in real time. And so these things, I think, really make it so that the writing is on the wall. Companies have to be thinking about these bigger, longer term issues if they want to even have a chance to be competitive in the future. COVID-19's only emphasized that more. There's been a lot of studies out that just kind of are looking at business performance over the COVID period because it was such a disruptive period. And there's some emerging trends that show that companies that have prioritized ESG metrics are in fact performing better than companies that didn't. And I think, what's really behind that is the fact that companies that have a strong sustainability purpose and have a focus on long-term sort of long-term sustainability and long-term viability and not just short-term profit show that they're anticipating future risks and building their business in a way that is future-proofed and thinking ahead to be able to, sort of ride the waves of these various changes that we're only going to face more and more. And also anticipating the new business opportunities that come with that. And again, that's where Oatly really, that's what's really core to sort of our purpose and our vision is, anticipating the plant-based movement and where and how this is growing throughout the world and the kinds of solutions that people really need in order to be a part of this change and feel sort of empowered and not just like they're being, reactive to all the various things going around them. So yeah, I think, hopefully more and more leaders recognize that, but I think that our business model is one of the pieces of evidence that shows why it's so important to do that.
This is great, and this actually is a lot of great information that sets up my next question, which is trying to get to a little bit more specificity about how purpose is playing out in your organization. So with the advent of the pandemic, and you all have been referencing that, maybe if each of you could give just one specific example of how purpose has successfully contributed to how your organization has responded to that. All the shifting priorities that have happened over the last 7 to 8 months. Maybe Balaji, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, sure. I think, first of all, thanks to all of the frontline workers, healthcare workers, and those who are continuing to fight this fight for the rest of us. We are privileged. Most of us are to be insulated from this to a large extent, right? So, one of the early things, TCS, for those who are not familiar with us, we are a $22 billion organization with operations in 50 countries. We are the most valuable information technology company in the world today, 450,000 employees working for us. So this is a crisis that we started seeing in December in Wuhan from our China operations, and then it started to spread across the world and significant impact to economies around the world. So the immediate principles that we adopted in response to COVID were to be purpose-driven, adaptable, and resilient, and to apply that to our employees first and foremost, to make sure that safety and security of employees is paramount. So very quickly, we were able to pivot to a remote model where today over 97-98% of our workforce is able to work remotely. But in the early days in March and April, we made that shift possible. Huge investments and a huge effort from across our functional teams to achieve that. But that was the first and foremost important thing. We also decided at that time that no matter what the cost pressures and the issues were, we would have no layoffs. And we communicated that very clearly to our employees also upfront. That was the first aspect. The second is serving customers around the world. We dealt with all the different industries and the challenges that they're facing, right? Certain sectors like retail and pharma and others were thrust into the line, into the spotlight because either driving consumer demand or finding a cure for COVID, their operations needed to continue and sustain. So keeping the lights on and then supporting them in their digital transformation journey is something we have done over the last 6 months, including creating a secure borderless workspace model, which is what worked for us and we have offered to our customers. And for those who are growing during this time, it is supporting them And those who are facing headwinds during this time, it is actually helping them to become more resilient within their operations, within their enterprise, and all without compromising on privacy and security and productivity. The third aspect I would like to mention is in my mind, the most important one, which is to be compassionate to the needs that are arising out of COVID. So as the Tata group of companies, our chairman and our leadership decided on a $200 million investment from a social perspective to support COVID efforts, and spanned across the divergent needs that were there. Early on, it was about communication and engagement with people around the world, especially the most vulnerable, followed by having equipment like PPE and other setting up facilities then to support isolation centers and setting up hospitals. And we have done that in India and other parts of the world in different ways. And then the second aspect of that is we did not step back from what we were doing pre-COVID. Our community approach continues to remain the same. We stayed engaged with our partners, with our beneficiaries. In fact, I'm proud to say that in the last 6 months, in fact, most of our programs have grown during this time because the heightened needs that came to the same section of population that were already disenfranchised and suffering, that needed to be alleviated. So that has been our focus. That is the second part. The third part of the community response is opening up all of our R&D and innovation and business capabilities to support. So we've done things like supporting the New York state with their unemployment claims. We've done a pro bono basis. We've done various NGOs and nonprofits around the world, supporting them with basic technology needs, because as all of us know, small nonprofits and small businesses got hit more, right? So they had to reduce staff, they had to reduce capacity, and technology can be an answer to fill that void. And we were able to do that during that time, including frugal innovation on ventilators, on contact tracing apps, and other things. So that has been the way we have approached it. Similar approach to our employees, our businesses, and the community.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Balaji. I'm going to turn it over to Andy now. I'd like to hear just really kind of one big thing that Mars has been doing as a result of the pandemic and that relates back to your purpose. That would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the biggest thing is the COVID was a pandemic that we have never really experienced in our lifetime. Certainly no one who was around in 1918 is around now to look at how we handled it. So essentially we provide purpose as the lens to make business decisions when there was no playbook. And our CEO on a number of kinds, when we looked at what we did around pay protection or of our associates, and we have very, very different associates. We own 2,500 animal hospitals. We have retail stores. We have a field sales force. We have manufacturing facilities as well as office-based workers. And and there were simply people who couldn't work because of COVID. So pay protection, a commitment not to take government money. COVID money, because we felt it was better done elsewhere, and then also extending our approach to people perhaps we weren't legally required to do it for, say a contractor workforce. And so literally a number of times CEO simply said to a decision was, how does this contribute to the world we want tomorrow? And that our purpose is the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business each day, or how we do business today. And so I think that's probably the biggest one I would highlight here.
Great. Ashley, what about Oatly? Is there any one particular thing that you would call out as a result?
Yeah, and Oatly's a much smaller company than either Tata or Mars, of course, and we have a much smaller, very tightly knit group of associates or employees that we call our co-workers, just around 500 people. And so, it's clear to them, and also part of our purpose, that people are really core to Oatly. And so through the COVID pandemic, our number one effort was really to just, in a very hands-on way, make sure that our people were safe and cared for and had access to whatever they needed to maintain that safety and maintain that well-being. So because of that, and because of that was clear, I think we were able to really, within our own business model and within our own production, we were able to really weather, I guess I say were as if it's ended, but I guess we still are weathering the thing that will never end. We still are weathering COVID really well, because we have that sort of trust and priority with the people who work for Oatly. So of course we went virtual for most of our office workers, but we kept the oat milk flowing, we kept our factories running, and really prioritized safety over everything else. Maybe the only other thing that I'll say there is where we really found a huge impact related to our business that also links to this idea of purpose being about people is with our coffee customers. So, one thing that Oatly is famous for is being present at small independent coffee shops in Europe and in the US. And of course, with COVID, as things shut down and people weren't going inside to restaurants and things like that, that sector really has had just tremendous challenges. And so one of the things that we did really proactively from the get-go is just reaching out and being there for those, coffee channel customers, and just trying to figure out, is there anything, nothing's perfect. There's no way to totally make it the same as it was or make it 100% perfect, but just really reaching out and just figuring out, is there anything that we can do together? Are there some models, some take-home models or take-out models that we can help with and that we can provide our products in a way that eases that transition? And at the same time, then responding to the really increased demand from retail. And everybody has heard about, grocery stores and the sort of overwhelming demand for goods in grocery during this COVID time. So really trying to pivot and position and make sure that we're able to meet people through this new way of accessing our product, or at least the growing way of accessing our product. So I think what's important there, and the lesson there, is that a company that can be sort of light on its feet and pivot and move in times of crisis or times of challenge, that's where you can really sort of weather these issues and come out in a positive way.
So I'd like to actually take one of our questions from the audience, because I think it's a fundamental question that probably would be useful to answer while we're talking about purpose so much. And the question is, can you give me a concise definition of purpose? And I know that we all define purpose in slightly different ways, but I'm going to ask our panelists to each from their own organization give me a concise definition of purpose as they see it. I'm going to start with you, Ashley.
Sure. So I think purpose is really, to me, your reason for being as a company. And it's bigger than how you operate your business. It's really about your position in the world. And that's why our purpose really focuses on, ensuring the health and the future of the planet and people.
That's great. That's very concise. Thank you. Andy, how about from Mars?
Yeah, I would say it's similar. I think purpose is an articulation of what the North Star for the organization is. And if you can't use your purpose to make a business decision, then it's probably not a purpose. It's probably a marketing strapline. I think the challenging aspect is that purpose needs to come from who you are. It needs to be real and realistic. Yet also it needs to be aspirational. If our purpose was we make chocolate products and feed pets, that would not be very, well, it might be, it depends how much so I can think my dogs would be quite happy with both of those things. But yeah, so I think that's the balance, but it has to be able to, you have to credibly use it to make a business decision. And we have been doing so.
Great. Balaji.
I think well said by Andy and Ashley. Only thing to add is that, when you define why you exist as an organization, look to your core strengths, right? And when you think of it in terms of what does it do, look at what does it mean for the communities where you live and work, right? Whom you serve. So that is the way in which I would define how purpose can translate to positive impact on all the stakeholders.
Great, thank you. Hope that provides some context for our listeners. I want to kind of move to ESG. we've heard a lot about ESG over the recent years, but I think in particular, since the pandemic, there seems to be an acute interest in ESG. The business landscape is seeing an increase in the importance and voice of stakeholders other than shareholders, especially as it relates to environmental concerns. How do you relate, or how do you view the relationship between purpose and ESG? And I'm going to start off with that question with Ashley.
Yeah, I think ESG is so interesting because I think there's a shift happening right now on how both companies and investors think of ESG. So I think traditionally we actually kind of got it wrong, in the business community. ESG was looked at as, you operate your company over here, and then let's look at that and analyze that. And are there risks associated with the environment or with social, and like, how are you mitigating those risks? It was almost like an afterthought or a sort of screen that you did after you already made all these business decisions. And then maybe you adjust it a little bit as you go. And I think what's clear now for the companies that most successfully integrate environmental and social issues into their work is that it can't just be something that you, after the fact, look at and sort of give yourself a score on. It has to be something that is inherent and intrinsic into how you are deciding, planning your vision for how you're going to operate in the future, making your day-to-day business decisions and the like. So it's almost that ESG is now sort of a misnomer. ESG, its purpose is actually it may be replacing ESG as an approach for building environmental and social and other issues into a business model. The difference then, and what's really significant about purpose, is it says more about what's your power to influence. And so, just as an example for Oatly, our power is really our power to drive the biggest difference or influence these larger global goals is really about not just creating our products, but inspiring and enabling people to take those products and use them to change their own outcomes. So, choosing Oatly over cow's milk, for example, because they consciously know that Oatly is going to help reduce then their carbon footprint by choosing a plant-based alternative over an animal-based alternative. So that's just sort of an example. Also thinking more deeply about how products are produced, what goes into them, and how are those ingredients developed, and not being a passive company to just sort of accept how those things are done, but really try to influence throughout your value chain and influence with suppliers, farmers, et cetera, to do those practices, to do that production in a way that actually leads to bigger outcomes, that actually leads to sustainability improvements and things like that. So, that I think is really the difference. And that's resonating not just among investors, but really among consumers. Generation Z and millennials now are expecting that companies are thinking about these things and are expecting to be able to know and have transparency on how companies are integrating these concerns into their business model. And so that's also helping sort of to drive this action, I think. And then ultimately, the other new aspect of this is really being clear on how you as a company link to bigger goals. What's your role in the world? For example, through the UN Sustainable Development Goals, what is your role as a company to deliver toward these larger global efforts? And you couldn't sort of do that well with an old ESG model. That really has to be, you really have to be fully incorporating this approach into your business in order to be able to respond how you're contributing to these very big goals.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Ashley.
If I can, I think I agree with all of that. My view of purpose, our view of purpose versus sustainability versus ESG is that purpose, as we said, is why you exist and what you are doing to make a difference to those around you. Sustainability is a set of principles and approach that can help you make it come to life, right? So it's not just limited to environment. It is a much broader aspect, right? Every part of your business model sustainability if your main way in which you create values through talent, for example, talent sustainability and things like that. The way to think about ESG, in my view, is how do you hold your feet to the fire, right? And typically what we call the say-do ratio, right? What you say versus what you do. Are you walking the talk? And the ESG metrics and the ESG approach gives a set of measures, goals, and plans that can be tracked and made more transparent to all of your stakeholders, internal as well as external. And I believe that, yes, the understanding of ESG as well as its adoption is increasing from the investor community, but more from boards and from executives also. And that is leading to change within the organization. So they're looking at it more deeper than, do we have a climate pledge? Are we saying we will be carbon neutral, energy efficient, all of that, right? Those are the high level metrics on the E side that used to define how to measure these things. And it is my view that it is going to evolve. It is not going to be limited to ESG. We're already seeing measures like diversity, equity, and inclusion increasingly being adopted. And I think any of the measures that are most relevant to the communities and the impact on communities will continue to be adopted. So the way we think about it is purpose is evergreen. That is going to remain, and you might relook at your purpose to how to shape it. But in general, why you exist as a company remains the same. Sustainability is much more on how do you make it come to life, the principles and the practices, and the ESG is a way to measure it so that you have, the say-do ratio is actually, you're holding the feet to the fire.
Right, thank you. Andy, I know that Mars has some very specific sustainable goals. Do you want to talk about the relationship between that and purpose?
Yeah, I mean, purpose is a higher order. It's deeper and broader, I think, than ESG would be. ESG very much is about some metrics that are important and can be related to your purpose, but they may not be. You may have a purpose which doesn't neatly, fit into some ESG goals. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have ESG goals. So I think the critical thing, and I think ESG is actually a fundamentally positive thing, because it means different questions are being asked by an investor audience. And I think by people asking those questions, it increases, one, they need answers, and two, it increases the pressure to have the right discussions within an organization. Now, our own environmental goals, our Sustainable Generation Plan, very much came from the inside. And they came from desire to what was the right thing to do. But it was also important to our investors, who happen to be a family. We're privately. We're all slightly odd companies here to be talking about ESG. To be honest, none of us are the usual publicly listed company with all the pressures of activist investors are. So I think the real critical question on purpose, on ESG, and all of that is, to what extent is it part of how you define success in your company? Are they part of the hero metrics your management team are going to be sharing with investors, with owners, with boards? And to what extent is it really built into what you reward people against? And I think the HR profession has got a big job to be done to really make sure that we're truly measuring and we're truly rewarding the behaviors we claim we want to see.
That's a brilliant segue to my next question, which is all about talent. Our survey found that the #1 challenge CEOs expect to face over the next 5 years is finding the right talent. 98% of CEOs surveyed agree that the new generation of talent have different expectations from previous generations. Those of us on the phone probably understand that more than most. Emotional considerations such as alignment of a company's culture and values trumping benefits like flexible working, training, and access to technology for the majority of millennials. This may change a little bit with the pandemic, but how does the subject of sustainability factor into the talent discussion for your organization? I'm going to start that one with Andy, if I may.
Yeah, I mean, Mars has moved from being a very secretive or quiet company to being one that's a bit more public. I mean, for that, there's an inside joke. So we're based in McLean, Virginia. There is another large organization they're based in Shane, Virginia, called the CIA. And the joke used to be there are two big secretive organizations in McLean, Virginia, Mars and the CIA. The difference between the two is the CIA have a sign telling you where their building is. We don't. And honestly, what persuaded our owners and persuaded our management to make a change was talent. We know that that people are 15 times more likely to join purposeful companies. We know from our own data that our associates who are aware of what we're doing and are engaged in what we're doing around purpose, around sustainability, are 160% more likely to be highly engaged. If they're highly engaged, they'll do a better job. And sustainability was absolutely core to that. It's something that people care about internally and externally. But it was also broader than that, is that we recognize that to be sustainable in a generation, we need to change decisions that people make every day in the business so it becomes second nature. But we also need to change communities in which we operate. We need to change smallholder agriculture, and we can't do it. We can't do that on our own. And so communicating about sustainability was critical to getting other people to join us in making changes, and also being very candid. We committed $1 billion for sustainability. It got a lot of coverage, got a lot of headlines, and we've already spent that. We're spending 250 to 300 million a year on sustainability. Part of the business benefit from that is you want to get a talent benefit, and if you don't tell people about it, and so we do use purpose as a recruiting vehicle. We actually ask people to talk about purpose in interviews, what purpose means to them. We're very much piloting that within our pet segment. And, it has to be part of your talent equation. If it's not part of your talent equation, you will only be able to compete on money. And if you're only competing on money, you're competing in some very rarefied atmospheres. And you're not going to appeal to a lot of people as well.
Thank you, Andy. Balaji, how is TCS approaching that?
I mean, this is a core issue to us with 450,000 employees globally. I think the question of talent sustainability and how it will drive growth and transformation for us and our customers is always on top of our mind. So a few things to highlight. First and foremost is that our approach is that talent is our most important resource. And for the last 52 years of our existence, I think we've invested in upskilling, reskilling, and growing talent from within, and then bringing in talent from outside to provide career and growth opportunities. And that has served us well, right? Both from a growth perspective as well as from what employees and talent who works with us can achieve by being part of TCS. We have one of the highest industry retention rates. We have currently it's about 92% for a company of this size and scale. It is very grateful. I'm an HR leader myself, and when I look at the war for talent and what's going on over the years, that shows that the kind of investments that you make result in the kind of culture that you want, and therefore the right actions. A couple of points to mention is, I spoke earlier about the core strengths of an organization, how you can benefit the larger community as a result of that. So the approach that we have taken is that for democratization of opportunities in the digital economy, people should not just be consumers, they should also participate in the economic outcomes, right? They should be creators, they should be innovators. And that, if you look at some of the societal inequities that exist, the underlying root cause of a lot of that is lack of that access, lack of that equity and inclusion in those opportunities. So that is what we are focused on, and talent is a big part of that. So whether it is engaging with universities and at the latter part of the learning journey for young people, and influencing their curriculum, sharing more about the future of work, the skills at work, and helping shape that, or working with K-12 and primary and middle schools to bring in computer science and design thinking and digital innovation, and helping educators with tools and resources that prepare young kids for a future where human intelligence can define artificial intelligence, right? So that is a view of talent sustainability And I think the kind of programs that we run, we made over 1 million people literate in India. In the US, we have almost 900,000 students who have gone through computational thinking courses, and in 200 school districts across the US, teachers have adopted this line of thinking into all of the core subjects. So you're not learning it as a separate discipline. You're learning it as how to learn, how to use these skills to make innovation and value. And similarly, the focus on minorities and women is high in these programs. And so our view is that you need to take an ecosystem view. You can do certain things which are your strengths through your own programs. You can do certain things by the coalition of partners. And you can do cross-sector movements like Million Women Mentors that we started along with STEM Connector 5 years ago, to bring million mentors from the industry to work with young girls and women so that they can find opportunities in STEM education and careers. And that has resulted in about 2.7 million pledges and 1.3 million mentoring engagements, right? So you can do certain things on your own, you can do certain things with partners, and then you can have large cross-sector efforts. But talent sustainability is a key. I mean, it is important for every country. It is important for the world.
It is indeed. It is indeed. Ashley, how does Oatly look at this?
Yeah, I'll be really brief because I know we're running short on time, but I'll just give one specific example. I mean, really for us, our purpose precedes us. So sustainability is such a visible part of the Oatly brand that people seek us out because of sustainability. They want to join Oatly and work for us because of the sustainability mission. And so just to follow up on this and make sure that we're always improving in this space, we actually survey all of our employees, our coworkers, every year. And one of the questions we ask them is, what was the reason that you joined Oatly, or was sustainability a core reason that you joined Oatly? And right now, 82% in 2019 said yes, that was a core reason they joined Oatly. So we're tracking that each year. And then we ask a few other questions about their engagement on sustainability issues, and if it's clear to them what their role is in these areas. And we use all that to create a committed coworker index, and we're aiming to sort of improve that over time. And in 2019, 88% of our employees scored, committed coworker to sustainability. So we really work to make sure that it's integrated into everyone's position, and that it's clear, from the first conversation they have, that sustainability is our purpose. And if they work for Oatly, that's expected of them. That's expected to be something that they share and that they'll contribute to.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn to some of the questions that we have from our audience. This is a good one, and I'm going to just open it up for all of you. Just jump in. Are there any examples where being true to your purpose has cost you money or margin in the short term? Because isn't this the real test?
Yeah, we've got a plethora, right from the investments we make in sustainability that we don't certainly need to do for the short term, so it's 250, 300 million a year. Through COVID, we've probably put about 300 million into our associates that we didn't need to do. Things that we were doing, paying people when they couldn't work. We've chosen not to take furlough schemes in countries where they do that. And in our responsible marketing, we walk away all the time. We don't advertise to children under 12. We don't sell mega-sized products at the checkout. All of those kind of things, where some of our competitors do. So it's all the time we're walking away from things that would, in the short term, we believe be the wrong thing to do, but be financially more rewarding.
Right.
Yeah, similar thing for us. I think one example is I spoke about not having any layoffs during this time. What I would want to add is that we had 40,000 outstanding offers in the market for our entry-level talent. And at the same time, we said we would honor every one of those offers and bring them on board. And it was not easy for us. It is obviously a hit on our cost and our margins. But that is the kind of purpose-driven leadership that you need to exhibit. Our chairman very famously a few years ago said that there are only legacy technologies, not legacy people. People can learn, people can adapt and change. So that sort of defines how we look at it. Yes, it is a hit on cost and margins, but in the long run, it has always helped us. And that's what has given us a pole position in the information technology sector globally.
Great. Ashley, do you want to chip in? Or?
Just really quick, I just say it's maybe a little different for us because since we've sort of integrated these sustainability priorities into business decisions from the beginning, at the very least, it's more about sort of like showing how much it's going to cost when you make these decisions as part of bigger business decisions. Like, for example, as we're developing new production facilities, including that in the business case from the beginning, it's, we don't even have to sort of show what the dirty option would be like, because that's not an option for us. But you still have to sort of like be really clear what are the different cost comparisons of ways to sort of meet your sustainability purpose in different decisions you make. And then the trade-off really has been, how do you do that in an environment of rapid growth? So we've had just tremendous growth the last few years, between 80 and 90% per year for the last few years, which is just crazy. And sometimes what that means is the best laid plans are thrown out the window. So if you're trying to get product to a new place, and it's really important to sort of bring that solution from a bigger sustainability perspective to a new market, but you suddenly have to ship something that you would normally try to produce locally, or you have to get ingredients from a new place that you haven't had a chance to do the sort of like full risk screening and things like that, it becomes a bit of a sort of a juggling act, or something that you have to really be committed to following up on over time as you see those daily choices play out.
Great. I'm going to move on to one of the other questions that we have in the chat, in the Q&A session. As COVID has put a lot of businesses in danger of not being able to survive the pandemic, so how do businesses prioritize sustainability? What's the business case for, in particular, small and medium-sized businesses committing to sustainability? And maybe I'll start with Ashley, since you are the smallest business.
Small. I am the SME in this conversation. Well, it was definitely a valid question that I heard a lot when at the beginning of the pandemic, like, are companies really going to be able to stand up to the targets that they've made? Are companies really going to be able to continue to prioritize sustainability? And it was definitely something to think long and hard about. It's telling, I think, that in fact it has continued to be a serious priority and something that's at the center of the conversation as companies have navigated COVID. And I think part of that is just this mindset and this connection between business decisions and external forces. And so, again, so many of the things that we're tackling from a sustainability perspective, like climate change, are these big external global issues that you don't feel like you have a lot of control over, like COVID, and how you sort of operate your business and react in such a way that positions you best in the larger landscape of those challenges. Often there's a lot of win-wins there. Often it's about long-term planning. It's about anticipating risk. It's about building resilience into your model. So it seems to me like, in fact, COVID has sort of strengthened the sort of driving force and case behind making a sustainability purpose center to your company, because it sort of shows the value of long-term thinking and long-term planning.
I'd like to attack this one question on here, which I think is kind of a good one to finish on, because we only have about 5 minutes left. How specific or broad should organizations focus their purpose? Andy, I'll start with you.
I think it depends. It depends on the organization. I mean, it has to be true to who you are, and it has to be aspirational. If you operate across a number of categories, it's almost impossible to make it to build it on the categories. We tried to develop a purpose based on veterinary care, diagnostic, pet tech, confectionery, food, nutrition, supplements. We wouldn't have been able to do it. You'd have got something that was so lowest common denominator, but it didn't mean anything. So I think it has to be true to you. You have to have some track record against it, and it has to be meaningful. to the external world. If you do it, it will needs to make a difference, and you need to be able to use it to make business decisions. So I would look at it that way, and it can be, therefore, it can be broad or it can be narrow. It's really what is right for you, and what is, you know, can it pass the laugh test? In the UK, we often used to talk about, you know, if you were standing next to somebody in a bar and somebody said, you know, talk to that subject, could you explain it to them without them saying, oh, come on, what on earth are you talking about? And so I think that's the same with purpose. It needs to be real.
Great.
Yeah.
Great answer. Balaji.
I agree. I think purpose can be defined or through aspiration, right? And every company, whether you're an entrepreneur, small or medium business, or a large enterprise, your aspiration will sort of define your purpose, and where you are in the maturity cycle as a company will also matter, right? So if you are in existence for a short period of time, then doubling down on what you started with and refining that helps. But if you are 20, 30, 40, 50-year old, relooking at why you came into being and what you're doing today is always helpful, right? I think it has to be evergreen. So it's not a question of broad or narrow, but against that purpose, what is your vision, right? What is your vision for a five-year term or a 10-year term can be more narrow, right? I'm saying this because, I'm an entrepreneur myself, even within this large organization, I consider myself an entrepreneur, and the aspiration is what I would say defines. But the gap between aspiration and reality is how you can sort of stress test this, right? As or the laugh test it, right? If you are able to mobilize the resources and put the plan in place, have the core strengths of the organization to actually achieve that, it is possible. I'm saying this because when I joined TCS, we were less than $1 billion in revenue, and we had an ambitious goal to be global top 10 by 2010. We achieved it 2 years ahead of time. You go back and tell 20 years ago, if anybody would have believed we would do it, I don't think so. And today, being the most valuable information technology company in the world, I don't think we could have achieved it if we didn't have the aspiration for it. So yeah, that's my view.
Thank you, Balaji. Ashley, a view?
This is probably more of a random thought, but I'll throw it in there. I think something that we haven't talked about too much in this panel that I've been thinking about a lot recently is about purpose as a value driver. So a lot of times we try to discuss either sustainability separate from profit and sort of business performance. We try to discuss ESG and purpose at a higher level, purpose at maybe a higher level than business performance. I think we need to shift a bit and really think about clearly purpose and sustainability can be a value driver for a company. That's something at Oatly that we just sort of inherently know, but that's difficult to measure. And so how can we sort of think, what kind of models can we put out there to better represent the role of purpose in driving value? And that can also be an organizing principle for a company to figure out what their purpose is, like not as something separate from the business, also not something that the business cares about, but that isn't linked to their performance, but really as a value driver for the company. So that would be a useful place for more work in the future.
I think that's a fabulous note to end on. I couldn't agree with you more about driving value. So thank you for bringing that up. I think we are at the hour. I want to thank you all so much. It's been a delight having a conversation with you all about purpose and sustainability. I'd like to thank the people who joined us for the session this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. And we will try and get back to the questions that you posed that we didn't have time to get to in the session. Like I said, there is a recording that will be available after the event. But just thank you so much to Andy, Balaji, and Ashley. It was wonderful having you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great discussion. Thank you.
Take care.